Good morning. Let's get right to Connecticut Senator Chris Murphy. He joins us this morning from Washington, D.C. Senator Murphy, thank you for being with us. And I want to start with immigration. There was a lot of talk over this past week about Title 42 ending and there being a big concern of a flood of people coming across the border. The New York Times headline was quieter than expected. Is that what you're hearing?
Title 42 is this law that allows you during a pandemic to stop people from coming into the country. But when the pandemic's over, you can't keep Title 42 in place, meaning you have to allow people to come to the country and apply for asylum if they're fleeing, violence or persecution or torture. The predictions by a lot on the right was that Biden hadn't done enough, and there was going to be a big explosion of people coming to the border when Title 42 was lifted. That didn't happen. In fact, the opposite happened. Presentations at the border are cut in half compared to what we were seeing right before Title 42 was lifted. That's because President Biden has taken a bunch of steps to try to force people to apply for asylum before they get to the United States. So I think he's done a pretty good job managing a tough situation. Title 42 was going to end. There was going to be a surge of people. It hasn't turned out to be as difficult to manage as people thought. And until the laws of this country change, the president is responsible for implementing what the law says. And the law says people have to come to the United States and apply for political asylum if they're really in trouble in the country that they're coming from.
We mentioned it in the headlines. There had been some reporting we did with some police chiefs here in Connecticut about these South American gangs, organized crime, coming in as tourists and then breaking into houses. It happened in places like Avon and Simsbury and Farmington. There's a lot of concern at the border in all places. I know these people were flying into, international airports. But what should people be feeling that those borders are secure from terrorists or thieves or criminals or whoever else might be coming across? What can you tell us about what's being done on that front?
Yeah, listen, throughout American history, we've always been made to feel like we should fear immigrants to this country. And that's a very familiar story. It's being spread about immigrants coming through the southwest border. Listen, we should fix our broken immigration laws. People should apply to come here legally. And anytime something like that happens, home break-ins, home invasions, it's serious. But the data is the data. And what we know is that people who are undocumented commit crimes at a rate that is lower, not higher, than natural-born citizens. So, well, we should fix our broken immigration system. This idea that you are more at risk if you allow people to come into this country through migration channels just doesn't bear out if you look at the numbers.
You've been very outspoken, and we've talked about it before, Senator, about this idea of isolation in our society. The Surgeon General just put out a report calling loneliness a public health crisis, which jives with what you've been saying for a while now. One of the things the Surgeon General talks about is pro-connection public policies being the answer. So you're the politician. What are the public policies that we could put into place to try to cure this epidemic?
I think it's real. And I think everybody kind of plugs into this because, maybe they've felt a little bit more disconnected. Surveys show, for instance, that, adult males today have less friends than ever before. We're spending less time with each other, in part because we're spending more time at home. We can shop from home. We can work from home. We're spending more time glued to our screens because of these addictive algorithms. I think one pro-connection public policy is holding these social media companies accountable for making us addicted to these screens, particularly kids, because once you get in the habit of doing everything on that screen as a teenager, you're going to continue that habit as an adult. So I've gotten together with a broad array of kind of liberals and conservatives. We've got a bill that would really stop these social media companies from addicting our kids to social media. I think if less kids were addicted to their screens, they would have more reason to go out and create connections. And I think they'd be less it'd be less probable that as adults they'd engage in the same isolating behaviors.
Do you think some of it is just in addition to the screens and the shopping from home and things like that? One of the things you've written about is church groups and community groups and things like that might have been more prominent in past days aren't as existent now. People aren't participating in those groups. Is that part of it? And is there something that legislatures, whether it's in the feds or the state or somebody, can do to encourage people to make those connections?
No, absolutely. I mean, you have seen this big decline, for instance, in church membership. I got my community growing up in Connecticut in part through my church, through First Congregational in Wethersfield, Connecticut. That was really important to connect me to my community and also learn selflessness. I mean, a lot of these social clubs and these churches sort of teach you to live outside of yourself. So there's some, in my party that get a little nervous when we talk about federal support or state support for churches. I don't think you should give preference to one religion over the other, but I do think we should have policies to help churches survive and grow, to allow them to attract more members, because I think the more people that are sort of joining together in those kind of institutional organizations, the healthier we're all going to feel.
I know there's also, you talked about some bipartisan stuff with loneliness. There's also some news this past week about a fentanyl bill, which has bipartisan connections. This has been such a deadly drug out on the streets. What can you tell us about what happened with that?
It's so scary right now, especially for parents. I've had, to have this conversation many times with both of my kids, right? That today you can't try anything. I mean, you can't experiment once because fentanyl is being pumped into all of these pills. The people who are doing it have no idea how much fentanyl they're putting in. And that's why you're seeing this overdose rate that is just out of control. So this is a priority for me. My new legislation that I've introduced to the really conservative Republican from Tennessee, Bill Hagerty, is really trying to stop the fentanyl producers in Mexico. That's where a lot of it is put together, from being able to start the trade. So the chemicals that make up fentanyl come from China to Mexico. The pills get made in Mexico, and then they get sent to the United States. What our bill says is that we are going to come after both China and Mexico with a series of sticks and carrots to try to stop those chemicals from getting to Mexico, and then those pills from being made and sent to the United States. I think this is a really important and innovative approach that can, at the very least, raise the price of these pills when they get to the United States, which will make the trade a little bit harder to perpetuate.
Another topic we've talked about before is the idea of finding more common ground on gun legislation. Last time you were on, it was right after another of these deadly mass shootings, and you said it was still too early at the time to tell if there would be any support. Anything that's coming down the pike with colleagues from their side of the aisle that might make some progress?
Yeah, it's really discouraging. Obviously, we had a major breakthrough last year, the first bipartisan gun safety bill in 30 years. That bill is still being implemented. It is undoubtedly saving lives. But as we speak, new parts of that bill, like taking guns away from all domestic abusers in this country, whether they're a boyfriend or a husband, is being put into place. But I had hoped in the wake of this last series of mass shootings and these just really horrific homicides, kids knocking on doorbells or pulling up to the wrong house being shot, that we'd have more Republican interest. We don't right now. And ultimately, this is probably going to have to be an issue that the electorate's going to take care of. We just need more members of the Senate and members of the House who are serious about our kids' safety, who don't pledge allegiance to the gun lobby. Right now, there's not a lot of Republicans willing to make the tough compromises, and that's really heartbreaking.
All right. Senator Chris Murphy joining us from Washington. I think we covered a lot of ground, a lot of topics. We'll have you back again and talk about more of these things, but we appreciate you joining us here on CT23 to give us that update on all those things.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll have you back.